NBA opened up last night, and I watched the Warriors and Nets game. I thought it was going to be a better game, but it just turned out into the Nets dominating.
Yeah, and I try to be as unbiased as possible. As you know, I'm a Net fan, and I love my team, and that's always going to be like, I'll always have the rose-colored glasses on when looking at them and analyzing them. It's impossible to not have that when talking about your team, I feel like. But you watched that Nets team last night, and I get it. The Warriors are not the same team they've been the past few years, but I don't see how anybody can stop that team defensively. Kevin Durant, watching that guy night in and night out is going to be like an early Christmas present because he just makes the game look so easy. And then on the other hand, you have Kyrie Irving, who makes it look so difficult, but yet he is so efficient. And those two paired together with Joe Harris and Landry Shamet, who could shoot the three lights out. And then, you have other role guys like Karis LeVert coming off the bench, who I think is going to be the sixth man of the year if he continues coming in off that bench role, because when you put him in with that second unit, it's essentially the team that you brought into the bubble last year.
Yep.
And he played so well in the bubble. So if you could get that production out of him off the bench, that'll be his award to lose. And the depth is crazy because beyond the second unit, even when you get into garbage time, they have essentially a team of playoff guys from the playoff bubble last year who would be in the rotation in most other teams around the league. Guys like Tyler Johnson who can play a role for someone. TLC.
Bruce Brown is going to get no minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
He was playing starter minutes for Detroit.
And the good thing about that is I said it in our preseason preview. I don't think that Kyrie and KD are going to play every night. Back to backs, you could essentially chalk them up as missing one of those two games. And it's understandable, with this short off season and them coming off such crazy injuries, you want them to get their rest in. So on nights that they do sit, you could still run out a starting lineup with Dinwiddie, LeVert, Joe Harris, DeAndre Jordan, Taurean Prince, and then coming off the bench, you got guys like Tyler Johnson, Chioza, TLC, even a guy like Reggie Perry, Bruce Brown. So there's a lot of depth on that team, and it gives them the opportunity to take their rest during the season. And I'm really impressed by the chemistry, because that was a problem coming in, but it actually has seemed like, although it's only been pretty much 2 weeks into the season, all of these guys actually like each other. And, you see them giving the game ball to Steve Nash last night after his first win. They seem like a tight-knit group. And, we have no idea because we're not in the locker room. We can only tell based on what we see. But they seem like they're really putting it together. And if they do that and they stay healthy, they're going to be a problem.
And like you said, they looked dominant. And what impressed me the most is one, Steve Nash. I think some of the sets he had out there were genius. The lineup, Dinwiddie starting, I think that was genius as well. Get another playmaker in there, because Karis LeVert, to me, when you were talking about him winning Sixth Man of the Year award, I was actually very hesitant if he was going to even come off the bench. I wasn't sure, but when he did come off the bench and I saw him play yesterday, I don't know if it's just me, but I saw a young Jamal Crawford.
Yeah,
I saw a young Jamal Crawford. The way that he just gets to his spot. His handle is quirky. It's not smooth, but he has good handle, even though it looks a little weird.
Yeah.
He looks out of control a lot of the times. He is in control. And I think, he can win Sixth Man of the Year. When I think of this Nets team, the question mark I had about them is, how is KD going to come back? And obviously, when you look at the stats, like the box score, he shot 7 for 16, but it didn't feel that way.
No.
Like, he had 22, and it felt like every single time down the court, he was going to drop a bucket. And then Kyrie looked flat out unguardable. And then you look at their bench. In the preview, we talked about their bench. But when seeing it, I'm like, wow. I don't know what team can stop them. I think they should, after watching the game yesterday, it may just be recency bias, but I think no team should be favorites over them in the East, and I think they should be favorites to win the championship because that depth is so crazy.
Yeah, and especially like the team that would really concern me is the Los Angeles Lakers, and I know they didn't look great last night, and we'll talk about them, but they have Anthony Davis, and he is such a tough player to guard because personnel-wise, it's like you put a big on him, they don't have the foot speed to keep up with him, and you put a wing or a guard on him, and they don't have the size to guard him. And so that's a concern defensively, but I was impressed with the defense last night, and this could kind of shift the conversation to the Warriors a little bit, but against a team that, with Steph Curry is always going to be difficult to guard, they ran some interesting sets at Steph Curry, and, he put up a solid box score, I guess you could say, but they neutralized him effectively, and they made other players beat them, and they didn't do that. So I was impressed with the defensive tactics from Steve Nash and how they utilized to get the best out of a, I guess, weak defensive unit, you could say.
And what's the thing, too, is that the only threat that they really have in the West is the Lakers, that we could say in like the Clippers. I don't think the Clippers can match their depth. I think the Clippers would lose in a series. The Lakers are the only team only because of LeBron. But when you look at it, you have KD to guard LeBron. That's always going to be a fun matchup. It's always going to be a fun matchup because both of them are going to go at it. But then you also have DeAndre Jordan and Jared Allen to
clog up that paint.
Yeah, to clog up that paint and guard Anthony Davis in spurts. I mean, both of those guys can do a pretty good job. AD will still do what he does, but they'll do a pretty good job. But then you look at the Lakers and who's going to guard Kyrie? KCP, Dennis Schroeder. Like, that's going to be the point guard matchup. Caruso as well.
And then you still got to account for Dinwiddie or LeVert.
Yeah, so I just – the Nets have so much depth, and it's not even just KD and Kyrie. Obviously, they take that team over the top. But with that depth, I feel like they're going to be a team that is virtually unbeatable, and they're going to look unbeatable throughout the season. I still want to see how they look like against the Celtics on Christmas and how they look like against a team like the Bucks who can defend and are very versatile, because it was just the Warriors. Coming into the year, I had the Warriors being better. I mean, it's just one game, but based on what I saw last night, I'm like, wow, they can't play with Curry.
That was concerning.
It looked really bad. Everything looked off. And I want to see them against a better team, but I do think that even against these better teams like the Bucks and the Celtics in the East, even the Heat, they're going to look this good in spurts. Like, I still believe that they'll look this good.
Yeah, and one of the biggest concerns coming into the season for the Nets was what was KD going to come back as, and that's why I feel like talking about them like this is not as much overreacting to one game or just a preseason 2 games, because all you really needed to see was one game to see what KD was going to come back as, and he's shown throughout the 2 preseason games and now on opening night that he is, maybe not the same exact guy he was, but he's still at that level, a top 3 player in the world, and it's really tough to guard him and tough to guard Kyrie.
Yep.
Putting that together with the supporting cast around them, they're going to be a very tough matchup. And
this is going to sound like a hot take, but when you compare this team to a 73-9 Warriors team that had KD, Clay, Curry, Draymond, and Iggy, call me crazy, but I don't think it's that far off. Like, I don't think it's that far off, because the Warriors' problem, I mean, not the 73-9, not that team. The team that they had KD the very next year, they didn't have any bench depth. Like, it was just their starters doing the most of the work, and they had to show up every game in the playoffs, especially. Well, just in the playoffs, honestly, because the regular season, they just cruised by. In the playoffs, and now you saw how it could have kind of got neutralized when the Rockets played them. They forced KD to ISO. They took him out of the rhythm in the offense. But when you have a team like this, that you have 2 superstars in KD and Kyrie, you have a borderline all-star in Dinwiddie, a guy who's been runner-up for Defensive Player of the Year in DeAndre Jordan, one of the better rebounders and rim protectors in the NBA. Then you have Joe Harris, a knockdown 3-point shooter, 40%. And then your bench is Karras, a guy who on a bad team could put up all-star numbers and get votes to be an all-star. And then, I mean, you got so many guys like Shamet, like 40% from 3. All these guys, you have 2 superstars in your lineup, a potential all-star, and then you also have an all-star on your bench, and you have a bunch of bench depth. So I don't think it's crazy to say that a team like this, like if you want longevity, I'd rather go with a team like this than a team built of like KD, Curry, Clay, and Draymond, because I think based on what I saw yesterday, their chemistry was on.
Yeah.
And as much as people wanted to make a whole fuss about what Kyrie's doing, He's obviously just been working on his game and having a peace of mind, most importantly, and it showed because he really played phenomenal.
Yeah, and a lot of people like to hate Kyrie because he is a weird guy. And I don't think you'll never get an argument that he is a strange guy. I think he would admit it himself.
He's different. I think
he's not normal.
Yeah, and I just think that Kyrie is different in his approach and how he approaches life, which is fine. When you have so many eyeballs on you, it looks that way. But there are a lot of people that are like Kyrie that don't have that many eyeballs on them. That's why nobody really cares. But, when you're getting paid that much money, everybody's going to talk about you.
Exactly.
And at the end of the day, Kyrie can do whatever he wants because as long as he's winning and he's doing good, then it doesn't really bother me because this guy has donated to charities. He's in his community. It's not like he's just saying this. It's not like he's Michael Porter Jr. when he said Michael Porter Jr. said that he thinks that the vaccine is going to depopulate the earth. He's not doing hot takes like that. Kyrie does have his things, but as long as he's doing what he has to do professionally, I don't think anybody should really have a problem with it.
Yeah, and as much as everybody in the media has tried to make him out to be this bad guy, you look and even the worst situations that have been made out to be, his fault. LeBron, every time he sees LeBron, they dap each other up. It's no problem. Kevin Love was tweeting about him last night, where they go back and play the Celtics in the preseason, and everybody goes to Kyrie after the game. They're swapping jerseys. They're hugging, laughing, whatever it may be. So, everybody wants to paint this picture of him, but sometimes situations just don't work out, and that happens in life. But it's not like these bridges have been burned. It's not like, when KD and Westbrook played for the first time and they were yelling at each other walking off the court. So I feel like...
Now they dap each other up, though.
Exactly. I just feel like it's been made out to be something it's not. And like you said, as long as he's playing well and it's not putting a wedge or a divide between the team, which it clearly hasn't to this point in the season, I don't care if he goes out and curses off the media every day after practice. As long as he's playing good basketball and is being a good teammate, then I have no problem with it as a Net fan.
I want to throw this hypothetical question before we end this segment because I put it on my story and I put it on Twitter for people to vote on. And I want people that are listening to the podcast, whether it be through a podcast hosting platform or YouTube, to answer this question. So I thought in my mind, okay, the Nets bench is so good. Is it better than a starting lineup? And then I thought the Knicks starting lineup. Is the Nets bench better than the Knicks starting lineup? The Nets bench is Karis LeVert, Landry Shamet, Taurean Prince, Jeff Green, and Jared Allen. The Knicks starting lineup is probably going to be Elfrid Payne or Emmanuel Quickley, R.J. Barrett, Alec Burks, Julius Randle, or Mitchell Robinson and Nerlens Noel. What team would win in the 7-game series? The Nets bench or the Knicks starting lineup? I'd go with the Nets bench.
It actually is. Now that, I was laughing at first, but now that you say it and I think about it, it is actually close. Because I don't know, depending on what RJ Barrett is this year, I'll say based off of last season,
the best player between those two teams is Karis.
Exactly. There's nobody in that Knicks lineup that could match what Karis is going to bring. And the Knicks lineup has Julius Randle, which is a net negative. So
yeah, it's very close. I don't know who would win in that matchup because you look at Jeff Green. I mean, Jeff Green is a guy who, when he gets hot, he could take over a game.
He against the Celtics and last night, he looked great. And I don't understand how at this age he can still be as athletic as he is.
I'm going to be honest. When he went to the Rockets last year, I thought it was a great move. I'm a very avid Rocket watcher and viewer. I watch a lot of their games. I'm a fan of them because of James Harden mostly. Jeff Green stood out every single game. He was one of the most, if not the most consistent guy outside of Harden in the Rockets playoff run. This guy, Jeff Green, against OKC was phenomenal. Against the Lakers, he did his thing. Jeff Green, when he went to Houston, he played lights out. He was the most consistent guy, even over Gordon. Gordon was very inconsistent. Westbrook, we know about his troubles. Daniel House was the third most consistent. And then Robert Covington was kind of streaky. Jeff Green flashed, and he he really gave life to the Rockets, and I feel like he'll do that same thing for the Nets. He's capable of having star games.
Yeah, I'll compare him to, me and my dad say this about baseball players all the time, a professional hitter. You know, there are certain guys who just get to the veteran stage of their career and they're no longer the player that they used to be, but they've been around the game so long. They've been students of the game. They're hard workers. They keep their body right, and they know exactly what they have to do, and it just seems like they always do the right thing. Yeah. And he's just one of those guys that has just been a student of the game, and now he is that veteran that you want in your locker room. And one of the best parts about it, he was with Kevin Durant in Oklahoma City. So, you know, bring that pair back together, and they've done a good job creating a locker room environment where, you know, there are a bunch of good relationships, and I really don't see any fractures. And I get it, it's been one game, but even last season, you know, reports came out, but it never seemed like there was problems in the locker room.